The morning I spoke to the pillar, I had a mop in one hand and a thermal flask in the other, and my only thought was whether the drainage channel along the eastern face had frozen again overnight. It had. Of course it had. Harvick's Reach does not do anything gently in the deep cold months, and the channel was a solid grey tongue of ice running from the base of the vault all the way to the compound's perimeter wire. I set the flask on the equipment ledge, propped the mop against my hip, and looked up at the pillar the way you look at a piece of infrastructure that has disappointed you before and will disappoint you again. 3,000 years, give or take. That is what the survey team said when the first of them arrived on Harvick's Reach 40 years ago. 40 years before I was born, 40 years before my mother was born. 3,000 years since anyone or anything had touched the inside of that vault. Smooth black stone, 40 meters from base to crown, no seam you could find with your fingernail, no panel, no handle, no lock. Just that faint green luminescence in the carved lines near the top that pulsed once every 11 seconds whether you were watching or not. My grandmother used to say it breathed. I thought she was being poetic. The three factions had been camped at the perimeter for 9 days. The Tessari Compact arrived first, with their interpreters and their resonance arrays and their 7-volume analysis of the vault's exterior glyphs, which they had compiled over 20 years of remote study. Then the Varren Directorate, with their drilling credentials and their legal brief claiming mineral sovereignty over anything buried more than 10 meters below the plateau's registered surface. Then, 3 days after the Varren, the Halseth Recoveries team, private, well-funded, and carrying equipment I was not permitted to ask about under the terms of the Site Access Treaty. None of them had been inside. The Tessari had pressed their resonance arrays against the stone for 6 days and gotten nothing back but the 11-second pulse, unchanged. The Varren legal team had filed injunctions and counter-injunctions and received, as far as I could tell, the bureaucratic equivalent of silence. The Halseth team had tried something on day 7 that left a scorch mark on the compound's eastern flagstones and sent 2 of their operators to the medical tent. The pillar had not reacted to any of it. I was the compound groundskeeper. I had been the compound groundskeeper for 22 years, as my mother had been before me for 31, and her mother before her for 19. We maintained the drainage, the perimeter wire, the equipment ledges, the flagstones, the access paths. We swept the snow from the base of the pillar each morning in winter so the melt-free cycle did not crack the stone around it. We did not study it. We did not file briefs about it. We kept it. That morning I chipped the ice from the channel with the flat end of the mop handle, working methodically from east to west, the way my mother had shown me. The faction camps were quiet at that hour, early, grey light, the kind of cold that makes sound carry strangely across flat ground. I could hear the Tessari's generator humming 200 meters away. I could hear the Varren camp's cook doing something that involved a metal pan. When I reached the base of the pillar I stopped, the way I always stopped, and looked at the drainage gap to make sure it was clear. It was. I stepped back and looked up at the carved lines near the crown, the way I sometimes did when no one was watching, just to see the pulse. It pulsed. 11 seconds. Then again. The cold was extraordinary that morning. The kind that settles into the stone and stays. And I said it the way you say something to a piece of old infrastructure that you have worked beside for 2 decades, not expecting an answer, just filling the silence the way you do when you're alone on a frozen plateau at first light. Are you cold in there? The green luminescence did not pulse at 11 seconds. It ran. Not a pulse, a cascade. The carved lines at the base ignited first, a deep cold green, then the tier above them, then the next, climbing the face of the pillar in sequence the way water climbs a wick. 40 meters of carved stone lit from base to crown in perhaps 4 seconds, and then the light held, steady and full, and the whole plateau was green. I stood there with my mop. Behind me I heard the Tessari camp erupt. Voices, the clatter of equipment being grabbed, boots on flagstone. I heard the Varren camp respond a moment later, and then the Halseth team, all 9 days of waiting converting instantly into motion. By the time the first Tessari interpreter reached the compound gate I had not moved. I was still looking up at the light. The Tessari interpreter was a tall man named Sorrel, who had been unfailingly polite to me for 9 days and clearly considered me part of the site's fixed equipment. He moved past me to the base of the pillar, placed both palms flat against the stone, and spoke in 3 languages, the vault's own glyph tongue first, then Compact Standard, then the old interstellar trade language that predated the current galactic record. He had a good voice. The words were clearly important to him. The light dimmed. Not out, but noticeably less. It pulled back from the base of the pillar as though retreating from his hands. and the 11-second pulse returned, slower, different in character. Like patience running thin. Sorrel stepped back. He looked at me and then looked at the vault and then looked at me again. Behind him, the Varren legal team's senior counsel was already composing himself to try. She approached with her credentials displayed on a handheld panel and her voice steady and official. She spoke the vault's glyph tongue adequately. I had listened to enough of the Tesserae's practice sessions to know adequate from fluent, and invoked the Directorate's mineral claim and the subsurface rights granted under Charter Article 11. The light dimmed further. One of the Halseth operators tried next, without preamble, pressing a device against the stone that produced a low-frequency tone I felt in my back teeth. The cascade did not reactivate. The green drew back to the crown and held there, faint and steady and distinctly unimpressed. I had not moved. Sorrel looked at me. Not with hostility. With a careful, recalibrating expression, the kind that means someone is revising a category they had assigned to you and finding the revision uncomfortable. He said, quietly, "What did you say to it?" I asked if it was cold. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the pillar. Then he stepped aside. I did not go forward with any particular intention. I went forward the way I would go to check the drainage gap, because I was in the habit of it, because it was my compound, because it was my morning. I stepped to the base of the pillar and looked up. The cascade restarted at my feet. It climbed the face again, green and full, faster than before, and when it reached the crown it did not hold. It bloomed, a wide soft radiance that spread outward from the top of the pillar like the opening of something that had been shut a very long time. There was no sound. There was no shaking. There was only the light, and the cold, and 40 meters of ancient stone doing something it had refused to do for 3 millennia. And then the vault spoke. It was not a voice, exactly. It was a vibration in the stone that my body read as words, the way you sometimes read intention in a face before you read the expression. It came up through the soles of my boots. It came through the frozen flagstones and the ice in the channel and the handle of the mop I was still holding. You were always the keeper. 6 words. I felt them more than heard them. The people behind me heard something. I know because I heard Sorrel exhale sharply, and I heard the Varren Council make a sound I cannot describe, and I heard at least one of the Halseth operators say something in a language I did not know. I looked at the stone in front of me, at my reflection in it, faint and green. A woman in a groundskeeper's coat with a mop. The light had gone fully steady. There was no pulse. There was no cycle. It was simply open. The vault was simply open, and it was waiting for me. I have thought, since that morning, about what I should have said or done at that moment. Whether I should have turned to the faction representatives and explained. Whether I should have made some formal declaration. Whether the right response to being named the keeper of a 3,000-year-old pre-galactic vault was something grander than what I actually did. What I actually did was stand there for a while, one hand on the stone. The stone was warm. That surprised me more than anything else. Through 6 weeks of deep cold, through 9 days of faction representatives pressing instruments against it and drilling equipment being staged beside it and low-frequency tones being directed at it, the stone was warm. The way a living thing is warm. The way something is warm when it has been waiting, patiently, at whatever temperature patience requires. My grandmother used to say it breathed. She was not being poetic. I stood with my hand on the vault for some time. Long enough that Sorrel eventually came to stand beside me, quietly, without pressing his resonance arrays against anything. Long enough that the Varren Council closed her credentials panel and put it in her coat pocket. Long enough that the compound's grey morning light shifted to the pale flat brightness of Harvek's reach midday. Then I took my hand off the stone, picked up my mop, and went inside to make tea. Behind me the pillar stayed open. The light stayed full and steady. 3,000 years, and what it had been waiting for was not a resonance array or a mineral claim or a device that made tones in the back of your teeth. It had been waiting, with the patience of stone, for one of us to come back. We had never left. That was the thing none of the faction teams had looked at when they catalogued the site. Not the vault, not the glyphs, not the pulse rate. They had not looked at who had been keeping the ice out of the drainage channel every morning for 3 generations. My mother swept this compound for 31 years. Her mother swept it for 19. I have swept it for 22. None of us knew what we were keeping. We kept it anyway. Some things choose who tends them based on power or knowledge or the right credentials filed with the right authority. The pillar chose based on something older than any of those categories. It chose based on who had shown up every cold morning with a mop and a flask and enough consideration to ask, once, if the stone was all right. I suppose that is what a keeper is. I drank my tea. I filed the incident report with the site access office. 17 lines, factual, no embellishment. I noted the vault status as open and warm, logged the approximate time of activation, and listed my spoken words verbatim. Are you cold in there? The forms did not have a category for what had happened. I wrote threshold activation via unclassified protocol and let the faction legal teams sort out the rest. The pillar has been open now for 4 months. The Tessari Compact has catalogued 42 chambers inside, all intact. The Varan Directorate has renegotiated its claims 3 times and will renegotiate them again. The Houseth team's operators have recovered fully from whatever their device did on day 7 and have been back twice with better equipment and better manners. I still sweep the compound each morning. I still check the drainage channel. The stone is still warm. Every 11 seconds I look up to see if it's still breathing. It is.